Hey, everybody. Welcome back to The Collective. We have another fantastic show for you today. At least my audio is working now, so somewhat working. So I'm going to keep my talking to a minimum, as I'm sure Sean is always happy about. First off, none of us are doctors. So anything we do say, anything we do come up with is our own personal opinions. I'm pretty sure, John, you're not a doctor, right? Jim, you're not a doctor. So here we go.
Thanks for the intro, Chance. I'm going to
All
take it
right.
over from here,
You
so we
take it
don't.
over.
Yeah, so we don't have to put up with that audio. Johnny and Jim, thanks for joining us today. Appreciate you coming in and having a chat about a few things with us. Chance is going to stay out of the conversation as much as possible, just simply due to his audio issues. Before we jump into anything, just give Johnny and Jim an opportunity to introduce themselves for the audience, so that kind of spend 30 or 45 seconds getting everyone up to speed on who you are and kind of what you've been up to in your life. Can start with Johnny first, please. Thanks.
Sure. Thanks so much, guys, for having me. Happy to be on the show today. Really, in 45 seconds or less, my background professionally is in counseling and mental performance. I'm very fortunate to work for the University of Health and Performance in Northwest Arkansas. Our primary mission is to help men and women transition from active duty service back into civilian lives under four main pillars: think, train, feel, and lead. Think, move your mind, train, move your body, feel, get honest about your emotions daily, and lead. Try to live a life based on your values. My background over the last 25 years has been in counseling, performance coaching. I started in a school system with adolescents and families, sort of morphed that work into doing much more higher end in terms of populace, so corporate and professional athletes, performance coaching, and found the University of Health and Performance and our founder, Matt Hesse, about 5 years ago. And so have been all in for the last 5 years or so in helping our men and women transition from active duty service and time down range to a civilian life that can be built around peace, joy, and actuating the amazing skills and gifts they had while in service into a career as civilian. So happy to be on the call.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you, Johnny. Jim,
Thank you.
yourself?
So, hi, good to meet you, Johnny. My name is Jim. I'm an active member of the RCMP. Currently a manager there. I've lived all over Canada from the east to west coast, some parts of northern Canada. My background is primarily in tactical operations with policing and managing major events. It's basically me.
Thanks, Jim. So today's topic, chosen by, maybe it was by one of you guys or maybe it was by chance, but the topic today is no plan survives, and I suppose that is no plan survives first contact, no plan survives the big plan. All of the plans go out the window because the plan sucked. The plan was awesome, but everyone else sucked. There's lots of different ways that we can tease out the concept or the idea of no plan survives ... And so maybe a good starting point is we've all faced it ourselves, that the plan that we had in our mind, the good plan that we had in our mind, should be the plan that was executed, but it didn't get executed for whatever reason. At what point in your early career, perhaps, did you realize the important binary moment where it was the plan is not going to survive this first point of contact? And what did you do in that moment? Did you struggle? Did you refer back to a mentor's wise words? Did you make things up on the fly, et cetera, et cetera? So can you think back to a moment, and you don't have to get into the details, where you realized that the plan was not surviving first point of contact? And what did you refer to? Johnny, maybe you could take the first position. Thanks.
Sure. I love the topic of the discussion today. I think for me, I view it more from the lens of a counselor and a coach, not being a veteran and not being a war fighter or in the tactical space. So much of my early work I based around folks that I had watched do it before, and although helpful in many ways, what I didn't pay as close enough attention to were my own talent, strengths, and gifts. And so I really leaned in to try to doing it the way that others did it, the way others did it that I viewed as being really good in their space, whether in the performance space, the coaching space. And what it really did was it hindered my ability to become more adaptable and pliable. And so what I really started to do was dig into new initiatives at first without the support of early mentors and help, with the knowledge that the likelihood of failure for me on the first pass was probably greater than the likelihood of success. And I did that intentionally because my thought was, I've been guided for so many years early in my career by mentors that were phenomenal, but they had developed their own sort of battle rhythm and tempo by which they counseled or coached. And I really wasn't doing that a lot on my own. I was deferring and defaulting to what I had been taught by others. And I wasn't showing up to sessions and to speaking and to work as authentically as I could. So I really had to work on creating my own blueprint, and really under the guise that, you know what, I am going to fail at this the first few passes. But the learning that came from that was invaluable. And so for me, it was really getting away from what was comfortable, and understanding that I have to create the plan with the knowledge that at some point along the way, there are going to be obstacles. And I have to be able to rely on my talent, strengths, and gifts to navigate those obstacles alone, and not rely on others in all cases to be able to get me through those hurdles.
That's amazing. Maybe we'll come back to that and build off of that in a few
Sure.
minutes.
Sure.
Jim, yourself, do you have any thoughts on it?
I do. You phrased the question very interestingly. I've always been a team sports kind of guy. So, the coach comes in and is always talking about, all right, here's the game plan. And I was always confused by that. What do you mean the game plan when there's 9 other people out on the court or out on the field that have a say in how this thing is going to go? So I guess I've always loved the chaos of the lack of a game plan, and the I'm going to call it the potential opportunity of a direction those things can go. I'm thinking game wise, but life wise as well. That aspect of chaos is an opportunity. So I'm just thinking we're probably thinking about this a little bit differently. I know the military culture is very supported by high-end planning and long-term planning, and I can't think of an example actually, but my personal life and my work life has always been kind of centered around that chaos, and then making sense of that chaos, and having an opportunity to deviate from that expected thought process, sometimes in leading to negative aspects, sometimes leading to positive aspects. So, very interesting phrasing. So.
Well, maybe like yourself, I also thrive in the chaos of the moment, and I have right from an early age. And so the plans that I didn't have never survived first contact. And so I don't know, over time, even though I've been taught a lot of planning and I've done a lot of planning and all of the plans, I've had plans on top of plans. I actually work best without plans. And I actually work best with maximum chaos. And so the plans that I might loosely form are, at this point in my life, really loose plans. I don't have to have a really firm structure or a really well-defined trajectory. I just need a loose trajectory to get me generally in the direction I want to head. And then I allow the chaos to unfold around me, and I somehow shape it over time. And so perhaps a little bit like yourself, Jim, my plans are not hardcore formed within the chaos. I allow the chaos to wrap around me, and I somehow find a path forward through the chaos. Johnny, have you experienced anything like that? You're comfortable in the chaos. You don't need a massive plan. You just kind of unfold it organically.
Yeah, I think for me, I want to just go back for a minute to something that Jim shared that I think is really powerful for anyone that is looking to really grow within their own lane. And that is something that Jim, I think, narrated beautifully, is that, when our coaches talk to us about the game plan, there is so much in our lives that is beyond our control. And as much as we work to execute what we are responsible for and what we can ultimately take responsibility for and try to actuate to the very best of our ability, we have such little control of the other people, places, and things around us and how they're going to respond in real time. What I've learned through my work over the last 25 years is just that, just what you shared, Sean, is that we have to be, to survive and grow and thrive, we have to be adaptable. And as much as we try to control how we show up in moments or how we show up in days, so much is beyond our control. And the notion of sort of that bulletproof mindset or that rock solid mindset is understanding that 9 times out of 10 things are not going to go the way that we want them to go, even with the best laid plan, whether that's in a gunfight, whether that's in a tactical situation like Jim has navigated his entire career, or whether that's in my work with our combat veterans. My idea of how a conversation could go or should go is often not at all how it goes. And so thriving in that discomfort and being very comfortable with what may come up emotionally is something that you have to get good at if you want to keep getting better at the work that I do.
Well, that's freaking awesome. So I'd like to maybe switch things just a touch and build off of that and get your thoughts on it, Jim and Johnny. So what I'm switching from is the individual understanding of no plan survives first contact, or the plans that we have as individuals aren't shaping up the way that we want. Now let's move from that individual scale up to the higher order of scale, which is perhaps a coach like yourself, Johnny, or Jim, like yourself as a leader within the RCMP, or like myself as a high performance race coach. So we're now not talking about the individual surviving the first point of contact. We're talking about, as a coach, observing that individual and the different ways that we can take that. And Johnny, you very carefully and very you illustrated it so well that we have a pile of different ways that we can shape that moment. And 9 times out of 10, we may or may not get it right, but 10 times out of 10, I'm going to try. And so it's been my experience that with enough experience, you may not get it right initially, but you can get it back onto a calibrated stream within a matter of minutes, or a matter of maybe an hour, we'll say. But in time, and usually if you've been in the game a long time, it's a short amount of time. You can get that person calibrated, generally speaking, in the right direction. So moving from the individual level to the coaching level, perhaps Jim, what are your thoughts on helping someone move through that moment where their best laid plan didn't work out, it didn't survive first point of contact, and how do you shape that moment for them?
Interesting. Both of you guys used a couple of different phrases. Sean, I think you used hardcore forming, and John used rock solid mindset. I think from a coaching or leadership perspective, I don't care what lays ahead and how the plan is laid out for that individual, but from a person trying to help an individual or a team get better is developing that hardcore form, or the defined resiliency, or I guess maybe a term, the SOPs that they're operating within, and help them be able to deal with any situation that does come based on a set of factors that you've helped them redefine. So I think that's probably the most important, is not necessarily developing a game plan, but developing the individual so that no matter what that game plan is presented before them turns out to be, that they have the ability to deal with it in the most appropriate manner. So I don't know if that makes sense.
So if I can crystallize that to some degree, what you're suggesting is that rather than developing out a game plan for the individual's game plan, you're suggesting that you're going to help create a little bit more resilience in that individual through a process, either through the conversation or through some guiding mentorship. You're going to create additional resilience in that individual. Is that what you're saying?
resilience and decision-making ability and confidence to do those things and make the right decisions, so that the game plan hopefully doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. It's the individual and the concepts around their mindset and how they're approaching that problem, that consideration, either as an individual or as a team, and how they deal with that unpredictable thing.
Oh, that's fantastic. Sometimes what you just said, which was amazing, is all of that is replaced with a simple term called empower the individual. And I've always found empowering the individual, like, it's nice. It's a glib statement that everyone throws, I'm going to empower. Let's empower the organization. Let's empower the individual. Well, I've found that it's often used so much that it's become almost meaningless. I mean, you're supposed to tease out the details of what empowering means. Well, nobody does. But Jim, you just did. And so empowering is a fun word that means almost nothing nowadays because it's used 4 times in a sentence. And so I think that's amazing, to be honest. Johnny, do you have any thoughts on that?
It would be very difficult for me to capture with more gravity what Jim just shared. I agree with him 1,000%. I think when you look at what builds cultures and teams and adaptability, I think one of the responsibilities that we have as leaders, as coaches, is we have to get to know our people. And what I'm always curious about, I know probably for Jim at his level, because he's overseeing probably more people that he could ever get to know individually. But what I'm always really curious about in teams is I want to know how to maximize the talent, strengths, and gifts of the people that I have on my team. What's really important for me is to tease out through observation, through discussion. I want to find out how people operate most effectively. And then I want to use those strengths within the team to offset some maybe areas of struggle that other members of the team have. We all bring such unique gifts to our teams and to our organizations, but oftentimes we get stuck in the stuff that we're not good at, and it doesn't give us a chance to sharpen the skills that we are very good at and bring those to the forefront of our operations. So for me, in working with either individuals or small groups, as we're speaking about it now, I really want to get to know the individual. And the other thing that I think we don't do a good enough job of in leadership positions is we make too many assumptions that could be completely eliminated or dispelled by sitting with members of our team and asking them how they thrive best, how they learn best, and how they like to be coached. It's our job as leaders to be adaptable in our approach, but we also have to give our team members some grace and understanding that maybe they're not where we are yet, and how can we coach them to maximize their success. I think that's really, really important. I agree with Jim. I am not at all as concerned about the plan as I am about the people.
Well, that's, bam. We're only 18 minutes in, and I'd like to go for a ride today. So I think we could almost end the podcast right now with just the freaking mic drops that these two guys are dropping. So how to build off of that. And by build off, I mean just take the conversation a little bit deeper. So I think that it's interesting what you bring up, Johnny, that you would consider a good course of action to look at the individual across the desk from you and ask them, how do you prefer to be coached? Now it's an individual, now it's a boutique, now it's a connected moment, which I don't know if that's so common out there anymore. You're kind of one of the first guys I've heard put it across that way, that you are that interested in the person across from you that you will interrogate them to the degree where you're trying to figure out what works best for them, not what works best for the institution or what works best for Johnny. Are you finding that, how is that being received by individuals? Are they excited that something good and new is happening, or?
Oh, I could tell you in 2 facets of my work. One with private clients, it's been very effective. But as it relates to the team, you mentioned, Sean, you talked before about this blanket term that we use that has lost its teeth, and that is empowerment. Um, and we oftentimes as leaders feel like we have to assume the role of empowering others. What I always keep at the top of my mind is that individuals are the experts on themselves. And so even though I have a background in counseling and performance and psychology, the individual is the expert on themselves. I don't know enough about that individual, even if I've spent months, in some cases years with them, unless I get curious enough to ask the questions that they are willing to step into with vulnerability. So to shortly answer your question, it has been a game changer in my work, not just with private clients, but with small groups. Because when we really talk about that word empowerment, it's allowing people to be the experts on their own lives and to step into those things that, well, now as a leader, you've told me that this is where your strength is. And we're not utilizing you enough. You're feeling shortchanged. You're feeling like you can't use your gifts and your strengths to the best of your ability that would maximize the output of the team. Well, I'm going to give you a chance to do that now, but I want you to tell me what those are. And I want you to tell me what that would look like day to day. And I really believe strongly in great leaders. We have to put our egos aside enough to maximize the ability of our team. And in the world that you guys come from, a lot of times the folks that you are training up, you get who you get, and you work under this guise that these guys are going to be really good at what they do. Otherwise, they would have never gotten here. Right. And there's a benefit in that to understand that they all have a certain level of training. Otherwise, they wouldn't have gotten to where you guys are at in the tactical operations space or in the warfighting space. But in my space, they come from, which represents the largest demographic of people in the world, is not that 1% that has been downrange or been behind the trigger, but it's everybody else that I need to know what makes them thrive. And just because I'm a leader and I have an understanding of human performance and human behavior, I need them to tell me what allows them to thrive. And then I, as a leader, need to hold them accountable for what they said they were really good at.
Yeah, that's that last sentence is the secret sauce, I feel, for sure. I mean, all of it was super legit, but that last sentence is the exclamation mark, no doubt about it. Jim, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was thinking of an example. Some of you guys are talking. I took a biking lesson there a little while ago because there's some things I needed to work on. I couldn't cross a threshold, and the coach was really good. It was like really identifying what do I need, what is my style, how do I want to be coached? Do I want to be jumped down the hill, or do I want to be guided and shown gently, that kind of thing. So there's a real power in making sure that the coach is understanding that individual. But I'm just going to throw it completely opposite direction here. There's also the aspect of finding out what that person wants to do or how they want to be coached versus that coach finding out what they actually need. And the reason I was thinking about that is I then, a couple days later, followed a guy down the hill who was slightly better than me. And we were just basically pushing each other. And I did more in that day than I did with the coach. So, there's probably a fine balance of that coach finding out what does that person need versus what do they want versus what they need. And I guess in that particular moment, in that particular circumstances, I needed to be pushed beyond what I wanted. I didn't need to learn. I just needed some confidence or peer pressure, even, or some pressure from the back. So that's an interesting aspect that I just thought of, that maybe that coach should do the exact opposite of what that person wants sometimes to get the most out of that person. So,
yeah, such a great point. And I think wherein lies the power of the collective and the community is that as a single entity, Jim, as a leader in the tactical space, or myself in the mental performance space, we do our very best based on the information that we're given in real time. But in the second example that you cited, outside of what the coach gave you, what you knew you needed intrinsically, if you put two people on that track at the same time, you and somebody else, you are the type of person that thrived because that cyclist was just a hair better, and you guys were pushing each other and you needed that. If you take another person in the same situation, they may hit the brakes, wait for that person that's a better cycler to get down to the bottom of the mountain or the track, and then they'll navigate it on their own. And so that really, to me, is a great illustration of really the power of the community. And when we can surround ourselves with people that are striving for great things, whether in cycling, in mental performance, in training, in the tactical space, then we stand a chance to, a couple things happen in that level of the level of the world that you all work in. And this, people either rise to the occasion or they end up out of the unit altogether. What I think we can do a better job of early on, and it's happening stateside with Ranger Regiment and some other special operations forces, where they're doing a better job of identifying the individual and not just saying, hey, you're in this pipeline and you're either going to make it or you're going to wash out, but you've gotten what it takes to make it here. And now we're really going to do a deep dive into who you are as an individual so we can maximize the opportunities, not just for you to succeed, but for us to be really, really lethal as a unit when we go downrange. And that's the stuff that I'm really intrigued by. I work under the guys that physically, the men and women that make it to these units, they have a certain level of grit and physical prowess in things that get them there. Why aren't they staying and why aren't they thriving, I think can be attributed far more to cultural and leadership examples and also individual strengths that we just don't pay enough attention to.
Yeah, I'm curious on your thoughts, Johnny, in respect to something that just popped into my head, and that is at one point in history, we'll call it 20, 30 years ago, there was less individual or boutique shaping of the individual or taking into consideration their skills or their pros and cons, we'll call it, for lack of a better term. That stuff just wasn't discussed or wasn't considered. And nowadays it is, of course, as it should be, in order to become a more effective and efficient team. Why do you think that started happening? Why do you think this, not new phenomenon, but this phenomenon of taking into account the individual's skill stack and optimizing it within the team boutiquely through good leadership, why do you think it has started to happen? Is it because the requirement of manpower, in the sense of recruiting is down, and so we have to make the most of our resources, or B, the traction or the new style of leadership, where it is a more personal leadership, it is a more taking into account the individual's skills, leadership? As in other words, is it because of we have to change, or because we want to change our style of leadership? What do you think?
I think it's a great question. I can only answer from my perspective. I think it's a little bit of both, but I think even more globally, all of depending on our age on this call, I'm 46 years old. I went to school here's an example we all can probably relate to, at least, to some degree. When I went to school, traditional education, we worked under very much a fixed mindset model, right? And I was told from the time I was a very, very young kid, Johnny, you're a great kid. You're just not a math guy. You're just not a math guy. It's never going to work for you. You're going to have to work twice as hard as everybody else just to get by in math. And so that story became my truth, right? And then all the work that Dr. Carol Dweck has done over the last 20 plus years around growth mindset, this idea that we can learn the same thing in a variety of ways, I think in many ways has been adopted to leadership. Whereas if you look at military leadership of old, or the old sports coaches we had, the very salty, you're only going to make it if we break you off. And if you're tough enough to make it through after the concussions and the injuries and all that stuff, you've earned a place on the team. And I think we've shifted from that while still honoring the importance of grit and toughness and showing up and working hard and pushing through pain, all of the things that I believe are still critically important. What we now know is that there's not just one way to learn one concept. There is a myriad of ways to learn a concept. And how can we take that ideology and incorporate it into our leadership styles? To me, it's by looking at the individual, or empowering the leaders below us to look at the individuals in their unit and saying, don't write this guy off. He is he has shown you that he is capable of making it this far. What are we missing? He is showing up on time. He's working his rear end off. He's a team guy. He loves this more than anything else. What are we missing about his ability to connect A to B that could make him maybe one of the best in our unit? So I really think it's a shift around, you can only learn one way. Now we know through that growth mindset framework, there are a myriad of different ways to learn the same thing. It may take me a little bit longer to learn math, but because I was only shown one way my entire life, the story that I told myself that I was convinced of was that I can't do math.
Yeah, that's a really important and fascinating point that you put across. I'm just going to add a little bit more to that, so that the audience who's listening, it'll sink in maybe a little bit deeper. I'm 60 this year, and my generation, when I was in high school, I was told that I kind of sucked, that I was a dumb kid, that I was failing in math because blah, 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 whatever. I was told that I was dumb by teachers, and I believed it. And when I joined the military, I thought, wow, I'm just a dumb kid, skinny, underperforming kid, but I'm going to give it my best. And I did give it my best. But along the way, I started to realize that actually I'm not that dumb. And so throughout the rest of my life, I just kicked as much ass as I could, did as well as I could. And as it turns out, I've achieved some things, some small things, but things nonetheless. And it was less than a year ago, I listened to a podcast, and I'm going to probably mispronounce it, but I believe it was The Psychological Profile of an Operator by Dr. Art Finch. I believe that was it. And so if you get a chance to listen to The Psychological Profile of an Operator by Dr. Art Finch, what you will hear is a version of my life story. And it kind of goes like this. Dr. Art Finch interviewed thousands of special operators in order to get onto special operations teams, and had to create psychological profiles of them. And what he did was, as each operator, as he was interviewing them, he'd say, hey, like, we've tested your IQ, and your IQ is genius level. What is going on here? Why do you want to be part of this team when you could be a pilot, or you could be a doctor or a lawyer, or et cetera, all of the usual stereotypes? And the individual responds with, what? I'm dumb. What are you talking about? I've got a high IQ. I've got a low IQ. And a lot of these operators believed that they were dumb, like I used to believe I was dumb. But then Dr. Art Finch goes on in the podcast to discuss that it's really discouraging that a lot of individuals out there feel that they're dumb because of high school at a certain generation, whereas they're really not dumb. So he's encouraging other special operators, or we'll call it, for lack of a better term, high performers, to publicly state that I used to think I was dumb because that's what the system told me. But I've been subsequently independently tested 3 times, and my IQ is 147, which is really embarrassing to say out loud, but I'm doing it because Dr. Art Finch is requesting that we do that. And I didn't know what 147 meant. I had to look it up after the interview or the podcast and realized that apparently I'm quote unquote genius, which is dumb because I'm dumb. You know what I'm saying? So the lie that we're told through a system that doesn't understand how to work with individuals who are either neurodivergent or look at life through a different lens. It's not that we're being held back by the system, though there is some truth to that. We hold ourselves back because the system told us a lie, and we don't actualize ourselves because we believe the lie. And so I'm really, really putting an exclamation mark on this point for anyone who's listening. Like, just don't believe what you're told sometimes. Like, engage in life, do your best, kick that ass, and over a period of time, you'll get to see what you're made of to some degree.
Yeah, it's so beautifully said. And I think just getting curious. So for anybody listening that has been told that narrative that has become our truth, there's so much power in curiosity and asking questions that are as simple as, well, I understand that I can't get it this way. There's a block here somewhere. Help me understand how I can get to the end result a different way. And man, I think what you shared, Sean, can never, ever, ever be overstated, because it has been, there's a generation of adults, and now even more. We you can't fit square peg in a round hole, but that's what we do in so many of our systems. And we say, this dude's either going to get it or he isn't. And there's so much more than that. And there's so much more to the individual than that.
Yeah, I agree. Any thoughts on that, Jim?
Yeah, those stereotypes are incredibly dangerous. I mean, we've all known people with PhDs who are not that smart, really. You know, they don't figure out life, they don't figure out those simple problems, but they got the credentials, right? Just thinking back, the way in which we test people or we look for people now has changed dramatically. You know, we used to want you to fit in that mold here, but the new way is like we need you to accomplish, you know, just random number 10% of these things. Like you just have to be able to do that. But after that, let's see what you bring to the table, because there's so much diversity or you know, problem solving abilities or whatever that we can't even comprehend or consider or put in a box that may add value there. So there's a huge value in ignoring those stereotypes and seeing what people bring to the table with respect to problem solving or technical skill or any of that. I've been listening to some podcasts on school models, and there's seems to be a wave or a thought process out there about changing that standardized factory mentality and giving kids the opportunity to design their own curriculum, or even giving them the opportunity to succeed, and you know, expecting that, you know, these kids are going to go off and do crazy things. They do the exact opposite. They come in, they define systems. As long as you help them along and kind of help them define where the parameters are, but they will define. People will surprise you, I guess. They will define their education for you and take them in directions that no one ever expected. So yeah, forget about those stereotypes and ignore the messaging and find your niche.
Yeah, and I'll add that I'm probably, you know, I've caused myself some troubles. I have been a victim to falling into that stereotyping trap when I'm looking at a person across from me. And so in my world, I tend to some degree red flag anyone who's got a PhD. I know that sounds dumb, but and that's based on a incident when I was a head instructor at a computer system engineering school, and after I left the tier 1. And so one of my instructors was standing in an elevator. I've told this story before, so I'll make it really quick. The elevator door opened, and there was this guy called Max standing there just stock still, staring at the doors. And I stepped in and I looked at him and said, "You all right, Max?" And he said, "Yeah, Sean, I just got a question for you," as the doors closed and no button was pushed. He said, "If I don't push a button in the elevator, do I go anywhere?" And I just looked at him and said, "All right, Max." And I pressed the button up to our floor. The doors open and I stepped out, and I just kind of shook my head like, his brain works differently than my brain. And I'm okay with that. But he stood in that elevator for an amount of time, I don't know how long, waiting for the elevator to go somewhere, though it was going nowhere. And in his mind, in his version of the world, he was academically considering if he was going anywhere or not, as he was going nowhere. And so PhDs, that was the first time I'd ever bumped into a PhD after my military career. And I thought, wow, so this is what is created, this kind of a thought process. Now, he was a PhD in math. And it was I'd say experimental math, but it was in a version of math that, you know, may create a brain like that. I'm not sure, but it was a brand spanking new brain that I'd never faced before, and it didn't work like my brain. So on that day, I red flagged PhDs as, there's a cautionary note. I have to keep an eye on any PhD from this point forward if it creates PhDs like this. And so I've got a habit of red flagging PhDs, but it's not that I dismiss them immediately. What I do is I kind of red flag them, and then I get to talk to them in either person or look them in the eye and get a sense of the individual behind the PhD. So I'll use another example to the other side of the coin, and that is like awesome PhDs. So just a couple of days ago, I was on a podcast with Dr. Carlos, who is a psychology professor, teaches at 3 schools down in California. and I was there as a co-host with him to not interview, but to participate in a conversation with a fella by the name of Dr. Dick Thompson, who is a veteran of the MACV-SOG era and is a multiple-time author and is also a PhD in psychology and teaches coaching and all kinds of things. And so I spent 2 hours in that conversation with Dr. Dick Thompson, and that dude is a legit awesome PhD. And so he comes with a wide-ranging experience or background where he has some sort of, he can insert reality into his red flag PhD plaque on the back of his wall. And so it's the complexity of the individual is the thing that isn't often considered. It can only be kind of considered in the real time as you're interacting with the individual. Otherwise, the plaque on the wall, the PhD shingle that's hanging there, I red flag it. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, Johnny, perhaps to start off in respect to, do you kind of red flag any titles to not be cautious of, but right away you're thinking, oh, I got to keep an eye on this. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense. I don't know that I ever have to the degree that you just explained it. I will say that the more I've become educated, this may not sit well with our academic audience, but I'm going to share it nonetheless because it's my truth. The more education that I've received, so a couple master's degrees, a CAGS, the less I believe it is critically important in the work that I do every day. Nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And nobody is even going to be able to access your desire to help them and coach them unless they trust you and feel like you can make connections with them beyond content. And so my education has provided a great foundation, which I can go back to and continue to expand upon. But the way that I learn now in terms of continuing education is non-traditional. And it comes from men like you guys, where I can share space and time and view my perspectives in a different way, or having conversations on the ground in Arkansas with some of our men and women that have a completely different experience than I do, or may even look at mental health or mental performance in a different way without degrees in education. So I respect anybody that is passionate enough to continue to learn to the level of a PhD, because I really think it speaks to the individuality of human beings. And if somebody's going to commit the time, attention, and energy required to earn a PhD, then I respect that journey. But it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to connect with me or that I'm going to connect with them. And so I really want to meet individuals where they're at, regardless of their degrees or lack thereof, or their experience or lack thereof. And I really believe strongly in meeting people where they're at. But I don't know that I've ever red flagged it to the degree that you explained to us.
Well, you know, like I don't like being ambushed by a big brain, so it's probably my own bias. So, but as you stated, Johnny, and it was a beautiful point that you're there to meet the person where they're at right now, and I love that. Jim, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I feel like I set up a target there on PhDs. That was not my intention.
No. I've always been that way. That wasn't you.
Yeah, I'm working on a second master's too, and it's not necessarily about what you're learning, but what you're learning from everyone else and how you're thinking about problems and diversifying your own mind. So as long as you have that mindset of you're not putting yourself in a box. You're learning to learn, I guess, or continue learning. I definitely don't discount anyone anymore, because I've met some people who dropped out in grade 3 who have no formal education whatsoever, and they're some of the greatest problem solvers I've ever met. And you look at some little thing that they've made for their cabin, and it solves some complex engineering issue that you couldn't even possibly wrap your mind around. So how did that person do that without that education? So I totally do not discount anyone anymore, because there's some smart people out there who don't have any credentials.
I agree with that, Jim, and that's an important point. But the reason that it's you're able to form that realization or create that pattern within your life, that understood pattern, is because you are broad based. You are widely expanding your understanding of the world. You're meeting a lot of different people. You're in a lot of different situations. You're exposed to a wide ranging life. And so you've come to that realization through all of those experiences that are uncommon experiences, I would say, to some degree, in reference to contextualizing it against a standard issue, career, we'll call it, or a lifestyle. And so you do have that clarity or that realization clarity now. But I don't think that's the case for everyone. And so that's probably the case for Johnny, and that's probably the case for myself. And I'm not suggesting that we're unique in this discussion or in this topic, but it's not as common, I feel, as it could be or should be in order to give this kind of clarity. So back to the topic at hand, which was no plan survives ... I'm now looking at you guys as having enough experience, broad-based experience, that you're comfortable in the chaos. You can make generally the right decisions based on those experiences. And so the world isn't as chaotic for you guys as it would be for perhaps others. And so what kind of lessons could you impart to anyone who's listening right now in respect to when that individual out there who's listening to this faces that no plan survives ... What are your thoughts on maybe first steps or a sequence of events that you would suggest to someone who is maybe early in the game of no plan survives ... And Jim, I think I'll put you on the spot on this one if you don't mind.
Good question. I keep coming back to that parable. I think you told it on this show once. Somebody wins $1 million and they say, "Oh, that's great. Is it really great?" And then all of a sudden they get done with tax fraud and they go to jail, and that's jail's bad, but is it really bad? And then that leads to something else and something else. So I guess I would say take that extra second and evaluate the potential sequence of events that you are presented with, and scope that problem, I guess, appropriately, and realize what you're looking at, what your options are, and not necessarily define your plan, but define your problem, and make sure you truly understand the problem, which direction you have the potential to go, and not define your plan without understanding your situation or your issue that you're looking at.
Thanks for that, Jim. And I want to ask you another follow-on to that. Let's pretend for a moment that there's an individual who's doing all of that. That individual works for you as the example, or works under your leadership. And so as that individual is playing all of those sequences of events out in a logical manner, your job now as the observer, or your job now as the coach or the leader, what is your overarching position on that? Are you going to passively observe and let them make mistakes? Are you going to actively observe and try to course correct? What have you found in the past has been best for everyone, or is it just too boutique to answer?
There's definitely some parameters that you should apply to everyone. I mean, I don't want to see anyone go too far off the rails so that they have to start over. But that is going to be extremely individualized. Like, some people need to kind of think of an analogy here. When they're doing bowling, some people need those bumpers so they can properly follow that path and hit the pins. Some people will just naturally find the pins. So I think as a leader, as a coach, it is imperative to know those individuals and what they need and where their parameters are, so that they don't fail, or they hit the edges of learning, or hit the edges of identifying what the concept is, so that they can bring that experience back to that problem and apply it to other problems. So I guess I can't give you an answer on everyone. There's definitely some lanes that you need to paint, but I think it's extremely individualized on how you deal with those people and how far you let them get outside whatever it is those lines they're capable of. operating within.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And Johnny, what are your thoughts on that?
With me, I think for me, I think it's different depending on as leaders and coaches, have we been the authors of that plan, and now are we asking our people to execute? And so the first place I'd go is I would look inward and wanted to make sure that we presented our people with all of the information possible to actuate the plan as best as they could. That would be the first place I would go if we were the authors of the plan. When clients come to me and say, this is my plan, and this is where I've hit the wall. One of the things that I want to look at first is how much did that plan. Let's say this is outside of work and we're talking about personal growth or mindset development. We fall short because we don't. Oftentimes, we fall short because we are not as invested and committed as we think we are. And telling ourselves that we're really excited about doing something and then actually putting the time, attention, and energy into doing it effectively are two completely different things. And so when I work with clients, I really try to get them to look inward and ask curious questions. What about this journey so far has gotten to the place where you've hit this wall or hit this obstacle? If people are being honest with themselves, I know for me, there are plenty of places that I fall short. And when I get really emotionally honest, it's because I haven't invested the time, attention, and energy required to get to where I know I'll get if I do the things that I'm supposed to do. And so then the question becomes, man, is this really tied into your values? Is this really tied into what matters most to you? And then you can very easily get down that rabbit hole around, well, why are you doing this to begin with? Well, why are you really doing this? If your intent and your effort do not at all match what is required to get this done, then what was the precipice for you starting this journey to begin with? So I look at it from a couple different lenses. One, as a coach and a leader, if I am the person who ultimately is entrusting my people to get this done, have I given them all of the tools, the training, the resources, and the supervision necessary for them to execute? If not, that's on me. I need to do a better job. But with individuals that I coach, how much does it really matter to you? Because any change or any course correction that we embed relative to the plan will fall short every time if their intent and effort is not aligned with what it takes to get the job done. They will run into one roadblock after another, and it won't have anything to do with the plan. 9 times out of 10, it'll have everything to do with them and their intent or lack thereof.
I 100% agree, and I think you hit the nail on the head in respect to either as the coach or as the individual. There's a point in time in that relationship where you do have to scramble down that rabbit hole, where you have to ensure that not only they understand why they're in the game, but you understand that you're in the game with them for the right reason because they're in the game.
That's
And
right.
as a coach, as a guide, as a leader, as a mentor, or whatever role you're involved in when you're helping someone else, when you're caring for someone else, what I don't work well with is if that person doesn't care enough for themselves to care about the process that they're in. And it almost devalues my time. I'm not going to say it's disrespectful because that's too hard of a term, but loosely, it's a bit disrespectful. If someone is asking for my time freely and I'm giving my time freely and they are not respecting their time enough, their why enough, their rabbit hole enough, that they just casually involve themselves with the rest of life in a wobbly journey that is not truly thought out well with intention. So maybe we've got about 6 minutes left before we go to closing statements. The last thing I'd like to touch on is AARs, or after action reports, and because it has a bit of a common theme in this tail end here in respect to if someone is doing it right or someone's doing it wrong or someone's in the middle ground of maybe it's mediocrity, whatever the case is, at some point, I feel we all have a responsibility to do a direct, concise, and perhaps even blunt after action report with someone in order to properly recalibrate them on the trajectory that they want to be on. And so that after action report, I'm curious, I'll start with you first, Johnny, what your thoughts are on perhaps the most successful, and I know this is a very general question, the most successful after action report sequence of events that you use in respect to a general situation?
Thank you for the question. I think one of the things that I love about the team that we work on is when we have our students down on the ground in Northwest Arkansas, one of the things we do as a staff every day is we do what's called daily pulse checks with our students so that we can actuate change in real time as much as possible. Not always the case when it comes to things like construction items in the facility that students would like more of that would enhance their experience, but things around staff attitude, how we show up, things like that. And one of the biggest piece that I think is very difficult with AARs, and it really has to be built into the culture, because you said it beautifully, Sean. I think we have a tough time as human beings with teams that we work very closely with because we love each other as people, right? I love the people that I work with. I love the team. I don't always love what the team does, and the team does not always love what I do. I am as flawed as the next man. I make mistakes all day long. But what we dance around too much in AARs is we say outwardly that we're creating a culture where we're going to have difficult conversations, and we have to be able to separate the emotion from the truth, right? The biggest challenge in AARs in small teams, but in teams in general, is if I'm sitting in a room with 6 other people, it doesn't feel good to get called out about something that I missed throughout the camp experience or throughout my leadership experience. It doesn't feel good, but it is absolutely necessary. And so I think the most effective AARs are when we build a culture where everybody in the room understands that A, we love and respect each other. B, we're all here for the same mission. And C, we have to be able to separate personal emotions from factual information. And then we have a responsibility as leaders to deliver that information in a way that is blunt, but is also valuing the human being.
Bam. Awesome. Jim, good luck. You're following that one.
Yeah, no, I'm a little worried now. I'm fortunate enough where I do AARs with several different groups of people, so there is that. But I also get the exact opposite, where in some of our groups here, we do have a culture of having that honest conversation as a matter of course, and everybody has bought into that, and it's extremely, it's amazing, really. Like, everyone will own their own issues. They will bring up the points that they personally did better, whether nobody noticed them or not. But the downside to that is that it gets almost caustic or self-deprecating to the point where it's damaging, and you kind of have to be that sober second thought at some point and go, like, listen, everybody, that actually went really well. I know you want to be perfect, and I know you have identified all of these little things that you can do better, and like, just please stop talking, because that was actually the most amazing thing I've ever seen. So there is an opposite side to that, and yeah, depending on which group of people you're talking about, you may have to drag the bad things out to identify them or address them. But there's also the opposite, where you might have to draw the good things out, because some people may be super high functioning and just progressing naturally.
Bam, you did follow that one, and now that doesn't give me an opportunity to really follow either of you two jerks, because you've just both said it so well. So I'm just going to move on from that one. I think what we'll do is move into closing statements. But before we go into closing statements, I just wanted to hit you up, Johnny, because it just popped into my head right now. Before we hit the live chat on this, you and I were talking about Northwest Arkansas, and that I'd done some racing in Arkansas. The name of the race where I got those 7 flats is called the Ouachita Challenge. Ouachita, it's a tiny little town in the middle of Nowheresville, and it's a fun race, a hard race, the Ouachita Challenge. So that's an aside.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
So maybe I'll start with yourself, Johnny, on your closing thoughts on the subject, No Plan Survives, or some of the things that we've talked about today. Thanks.
Yeah, well, I guess first and foremost, and quickly, thank you all for having me on. It's amazing when you can share time and space with individuals that challenge you to dig in and really think about our path, not just as individuals, but our path as leaders. And so I'm grateful for the opportunity to have met Jim and both of you guys, to be able to dig into a topic that I think all of us, regardless of our field of occupation, within our families, as we navigate this beautiful journey that is life, we all have to confront day to day. I think the biggest things for me that I took from today, that I hope our listeners did as well, was the ability to be adaptable, the ability to be coachable, and the understanding that the more we can put ourselves in positions, as you put it, Sean, earlier, where we can get wrapped in that chaos and that discomfort, I think is a great place for us to grow and learn a lot about ourselves. Even though it doesn't feel great at first, I think there's we have to dispel the notion that chaos is bad, that volatility is bad. These things are not bad. These things are some of the greatest catalysts for growth. If we understand that the waters don't stay rough the whole time, but we can damn sure swim well when they are rough. So great call. It's been an honor to share space with all of you, and I'll leave it at that.
That's amazing. Thank you, Johnny.
Thank
Jim,
you.
yourself?
Tough to follow that one as well. It has been a pleasure as always with you guys. Good to meet you.
Likewise.
Johnny.
Thank you, sir.
I guess I would just say no plan survives first contact. Correct. We're going to have to deal with that. Prepare your personal flexibility, your adaptability, expand your mind, prepare your mind for problem solving and pulling on the thread that you need to get through that problem. So, pleasure as always, and great chat.
Thank you, Jim. I really appreciate that. So my final closing comments are, gentlemen, I have nothing more to add because you both cracked it out of the park. I really respect and appreciate your time, but more correctly, it's not just your time. It's the time of your experience, what you bring to the table in your clear thoughts and your wise lives that you brought to this conversation. It's made me think about things a couple of different ways. It's made me learn a few more things about how to do life better. So I know if I'm learning, the audience is learning. And that is the beauty of a growth mindset with people who are in the game of growth mindset. So, gents, thanks for your time. And appreciate anyone who's listening to this right now or listens to this later on. I'll close off with thanks for joining us over here on The Collective. We're here every day where we learn, build, and grow together as a team of ass kickers. Chimo.
Love it.